I'm going to read you a winter story that I wrote called Eryndel and Lythiel. In the land of Taloria, two women ruled, two queens, two sisters who were called Eryndel and Lythiel. Eryndel was the keeper of winter, with skin the color of snow and a cloak like storm clouds. Her long white hair flowed like frozen rivers, and her breath was like the wind that stilled all life around her. Under Eryndel's reign, the castle of Taloria lay in a deep slumber, awaiting the promise of warmth with the return of the sun, which would come with the reign of Lythiel, the keeper of summer. She was a queen with a golden, sun-kissed skin, and her hair shimmered gold and cascaded in waves of amber and honey. Under her rule, the castle was warm and in bloom. Lythiel coaxed forth flowers, fruits, and bounty. During the year, the rulership of Eryndel and Lythiel wove around Taloria like a garland, each strand leaning on the other. Their division of tasks was as ancient as the world. It had been passed on to them by their mothers, and they received it from theirs. And those before had passed it too, for as far back as anyone could remember. Together they made the wheel of time turn, year after year, in a rhythm as natural as breath. The longest night of the year, the solstice, was Eryndel's favorite night. Midwinter was when she was at her strongest, her most glorious, and her most cold. The people of Taloria even called this night the Night of Eryndel. On this night, Eryndel, as she always did, planted the seed of the rose of death and rebirth, a seed that she placed in the ground right when the bells rang 12 at midnight. So this year too, Eryndel left her castle, and while she walked down the valley, setting foot for foot in the white snow, she left a trail that was soon filled again with fresh snow, as if she was never there. That was Eryndel's power, the power to erase all that was. She quietly walked down towards the rose of death and rebirth that she planted last year. A rose that in the summer had bloomed with a shining pearl white, but now was wilted and frozen. Eryndel pulled this rose from the frozen ground while singing her songs of ceremony, songs with the dreams of frozen lakes and lands, songs that tied the seed to the cycles of nature and to new life emerging from cold, harsh conditions. Songs with the promise of growth in even the most challenging environments. She learned the songs from her mother, and soon she would pass them on to her own daughter, Navara, who was still too young today to be joining the tasks. Once the rose was removed from the soil, exactly where it stood, Eryndel planted her crystal staff firmly into the frozen earth, making a deep hole. There, with much care, she would lay a new seed, a seed that would grow into the new rose of death and rebirth, a rose that would unfold in springtime and signal Lythiel to take over the reign, right when the day was equal in length as the night. But this year, while Eryndel sang her ceremony songs, something unexpected happened. She did something she had never done before at Midwinter. She walked over to the frozen lake of Selwynith, as if drawn by an unseen force. At the edge of the lake, Eryndel, the keeper of winter, looked down into the water that was a frozen mirror of ice, reflecting everything around. Eryndel looked at herself, at her own reflection. She hadn't looked closely and critically at herself for a long time, and now she couldn't look away. First, she smiled. There she was, the Queen of Cold, radiant like snow and majestic in her appearance. But there was something that caught her attention, something that didn't feel right, something that bothered her. She saw lines in her face, lines around her eyes, and she noticed how silver wove through her hair. Before, it used to be pure white. Her shoulders didn't look as broad as they used to. They looked hunched, even, and the skin under her eyes was darker than before. Questions clung to her like frost. Was this the consequence of the many winters weighing upon her? But as the Winter Queen, wasn't she supposed to be a force of nature? Shouldn't she be shimmering like snow? Shouldn't she be as ethereal as the stars? Why did she look so fatigued? And what did it mean? Was she becoming old? Would she be irrelevant? Would she be forgotten one day? Eryndel, the queen who had always been steady as the ancient mountains, lost herself in fear over the times that would come and her role in it. And so it came to pass that night at midnight, with the ringing of the bells, rather than planting the seed of the rose of life, of death and rebirth, Eryndel decided that she wouldn't plant the seed, which meant that time, and so the aging of the Queen of Winter, would freeze. The next day, Eryndel returned to the lake and stared in the frozen water. And so she did, all the days that followed. Every day she observed her reflection, and she was relieved that she stopped aging. But with her aging standing still, so did everything else in Taloria. In fact, nothing changed. The night stayed the length of the solstice, and the winter kept biting at the land. The winds kept hurling, the snow kept falling, and the soil remained frozen. It was not as it should be. But Eryndel decided that it was only a small price to pay for keeping her youth. And her daughter? She wouldn't suffer the burdens of aging. She could be a child forever, never having to carry the responsibilities of the life of an adult. This was Eryndel's gift to her daughter. And thus the promise of spring that year remained unspoken, and soon the consequences of the decision of the Winter Queen became clear. The earth did not stir, the rivers remained frozen, fish stayed locked beneath sheets of ice, and the animals who had always trusted the turning of the wheel stopped having babies and were starving in their dens. The people of the land of Taloria were terrified. Their provisions for the winter were slowly running out, and no new seeds could be planted in the deeply frozen dirt. There were no flowers that turned into fruits, and the nights ruled the days, as if the earth was holding her breath. In the unchanging cold, Queen Lythiel fell ill. She grew weak without her purpose. Her golden hair faded to a pale flax, and the warmth of her eyes was flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. When the Queen of Winter saw her sisters dimming and her strength slipping away, it pained her deeply. And for the first time, she questioned her choice not to plant the seed, but not long enough to change her decision. Her unchanging age was not yet something she wanted to give up. The people of Taloria complained to the queen that death was slowly taking over the land, but still Eryndel wouldn't act. Rather than planting the seed, she went down to the lake to stare at her own complexion that was unchanging and forever beautiful. It wasn't until Navara, her daughter, stood at the side of the frozen lake and spoke of missing that the queen listened. Navara spoke of missing the gentle touch of the spring breeze on her face that carried the scent of honeyed fruit and wildflowers, and the rustling of fresh green leaves, the soft murmurs of the summer streams, and the fluttering of wings of birds in the air. Navara missed the shimmering of the sunlight in Lake Selwynith. She spoke of plump fruits that hung heavy on their branches, singing songs of sugar, and the scent of summer rain on the warm soil. In the musings of the words of her daughter, Queen Eryndel found her own remembrance of how it used to be and all the goodness that Lythiel brought with her. "Mother, you must plant the seed," Navara said, her small voice almost trembling. "Lythiel needs you to return to summer. The people of Taloria need you to step back into the cycles. The earth needs you to accept your fate." Eryndel knew that her daughter, who was wise beyond her years, was right. Her sister was fading and the land was dying, all because of her decision not to age. All because Eryndel wanted to push out her own death. The Winter Queen looked down at her reflection in the lake, now not just seeing herself, but the frost-covered trees behind her and the fish that lay frozen beneath the icy surface. Did she love herself and her own beauty more than all that depended on her? A crystal-frozen tear dropped down the queen's cheek while she shook her head. "My dearest daughter, I'm afraid that even if I wanted to restore the cycles, I can't. The ground is too harshly frozen. No seed can spring to life in the soil now." Navara frowned. "We can ask Aunt Lythiel for help." And so, on the darkest night that lasted an eternity, the Winter Queen and her daughter went to the room of Queen Lythiel, who lay in her bed, pale and lifeless, her golden head tucked deeply into her velvet pillow. To Eryndel's great relief, she noticed that a portion of the warmth Lythiel was known for was still there, in the form of a golden light in her hands that lay folded on the blanket. "I need your help, sister," Eryndel, the Winter Keeper, whispered to the Summer Queen. Lythiel looked up, her face bloodless. She smiled softly, as though she had been waiting for this moment, and then nodded with difficulty. "All right," she said. And so the two queens made their way to the frozen lake, Eryndel supporting Lythiel's every step through the thick snow. And exactly where the rose of death and rebirth once stood, the Winter Queen knelt onto her knees, her daughter Navara to her left, Lythiel to her right. She cried frozen teardrops into the gaping hole that was still seedless, almost an entire year now. Then Eryndel pressed her trembling hands to the cold ground. "I ask for forgiveness," she said. "I ask yours, Lythiel, for taking your light, and yours, Navara, for taking your right to grow, and yours, Taloria, for stealing your joy and nourishment." With those words, the Winter Queen took the seed that had rested in her pocket all this time in her hand. She nodded at it. "Change is not failure," she said. "Aging is not a mistake. It's not a curse, it's a gift. Though I'll grow old, though my own death will one day come, life will rise again." With these words, she dropped the seed into the frozen soil. Lythiel, the Queen of Summer, slowly kneeled and placed her hands on the ground, the faint glow from her hands seeping into the frozen earth. She whispered wishes for abundance, growth, and prosperity. The following weeks, the days grew longer again, and the darkness of the night retreated. The harshness of the storms decreased, and gusts of warm spring winds breathed over the lands not long after. The ice on the lake cracked and melted, freeing the fish. The rivers began to flow, and the animals stirred in their dens. And from the seed of the rose, a green shoot emerged, like magic clockwork. The people of Taloria rejoiced as the wheel of the year turned again, as it always had. And right before passing her reign to Lythiel, on the day when the night was its equal, the Queen of Winter looked into the lake of Selwynith. This time, she didn't only see the lines of age, she saw her daughter beside her, and the cycles taking their turn. She realized how her wisdom had returned to her with the spinning of the wheel. She finally understood that aging was not an end, but a passing of the torch, just as the winter yielded to summer. One day her time would end, but her daughter Navara, her bright seed, would carry the promise of renewal for the years to come. And from that day forward, the Winter Queen Eryndel taught Navara everything she knew about planting seeds, about the balance of endings and beginnings, and about the beauty of change. But the girl really didn't need to learn much, as she had seen what happens without the turning of time. To plant the seed is to trust the promise of tomorrow, the girl whispered that next midwinter, as her small hands pressed the seed of the rose of death and rebirth into the frozen ground.